I'm Heather Harmon. I head up marketing for Rev1 Ventures. Thank you for joining us at our inaugural virtual founders story. So we have Gary Rutherford with us. So thank you for joining us, Gary.
Glad to be here.
Please send in your questions on the Facebook comments. I will be asking Wayne and Ryan, or Wayne and Gary, to read out the question, and then we will answer it all throughout. So don't wait till the end. We'll be answering your questions as they come in, and we're expecting to be on this for about 45 minutes. Longer if the conversation goes longer. So thank you for joining us. Rev1 has gone 100% virtual at this point. We are trying to make accommodations for the times that we are in now. And so look for more information on additional virtual events from Rev1. And thank you for joining us. I'm going to invite Wayne Embry to sit in this seat and let you two take it away. Thanks.
Great.
Thank you, Heather. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our virtual founder story. And we're thrilled to have Gary Rutherford, co-founder of HealthPlan Data Solutions, with us. And we're going to keep it simple. And Gary, just let you start off by describing HealthPlan Data Solutions, what you do, and what problems you're trying to solve.
Okay, HealthPlan Data Solutions conceptually started about 10 years ago. We didn't actually start working with customers until probably 8 years ago. But we're a data analytics company. We have a SaaS product, and we provide that product to currently to payers of prescription benefit services. So it might be a state agency, might be a large employer, could be a third-party plan, an insurance plan.
And so why are they using your service?
Well, we brought it to the market to provide transparency into everything pharmacy. So there's an awful lot about pharmacy that isn't obvious, and there's a lot of data associated with pharmacy, a lot of claims, and it's very difficult to get a handle on what's really happening. And then it's also very difficult to have the expertise in one place in a company to really even look at the data and understand what it's telling you. And so what we try to do is aggregate that data and make it easier to understand. And as we say, everything transparent. So try to make things clear as to how all the players in the distribution cycle are behaving.
So one of the things we always hear, especially now we're in the political season, is just how expensive healthcare is.
Right.
And the pharmaceutical companies, the PBMs, everybody's sort of in the supply chain associated with pharmaceuticals is in the crosshairs. But my understanding is total spend on pharmaceuticals is about 10 to 12% of total healthcare. How do you rationalize that with your customer base and with the people that you work with as part of that transparency process?
Well, even though the spend, the total medical spend, pharmacy only represents 10, and I'd say goes as high as 20%. It depends on the market. Medicaid is different from Medicare, which is different from commercial. Workers' comp is a whole nother population. So, but even at 10%, some of these companies that we work with, or state agency, are spending billions. Saving 30% of the 10% can be a big number. It's certainly more than pays for our services,
right.
And so there's some real value to them. And they're very interested in containing also, the trend is it's increasing because of the increased use of specialty medications. So that's something that we can help them do, is to bend that curve and to actually get deflation on their pharmacy spend rather than inflation year on year and out and in and out. So.
And how do you help your customers? As we see a growing trend, and especially medication. So gene therapy, cell therapies coming into the market, very expensive solutions. Ideally, fewer treatments with those. How do you help them rationalize the cost and cost structure of those pharmaceuticals?
Well, certainly many of those medications are worth the investment when you look at the cost of a disease like hepatitis. And so the treatment, while somewhere between probably $60,000 and $100,000 for the drug therapy, the treatment of liver failure is much more expensive. It makes me think back in the early days, we used to have surgery for ulcers, and then they invented Prilosec and the H2 inhibitors, and so we treated almost exclusively with medication. At first it was very expensive, but again, compared to the care and the risk associated with surgery, it's worth the investment. And we can't lose sight of the fact our company we serve the payer, but ultimately we serve the patient. And so people have a healthcare benefit because they want to take care of their people. It's not just the right moral thing to do, it's good business also. So, as an employer, we're concerned about the health of our employees. We want them to eat right, we want them to exercise, and if they take medication, we want them to take it correctly. And so that's all part of what we do. Our company was started with a team of pharmacists and IT professionals, and we really put the brain of a pharmacist, an ambulatory pharmacist, into our software initially. And part of my brain is in there, but we've gotten even better brains in there since. But the outlook of an ambulatory pharmacist, someone that's dealing with people's health care on a day-to-day basis, is very practical. We're looking not only at the patient and the disease, we're also looking at affordability, practicality, and so I think that's all gone into our software and how we look at things. Specialty, everybody's interested in that. There are more and more duplicates in the different categories. There's biosimilars, which are drugs that they may not be, it's not a true generic, but they have the same receptor sites, the same mode of action. So we'll start making suggestions in that area, but there's a lot of work to be done too. Yeah.
So you, as you mentioned, you started out life as a pharmacist,
right?
And kind of saw everything from the small pharmacy to the large chains, the entire spectrum there. But what's the fundamental why behind HealthPlan Data Solutions? Why did you start it? Why with your founders, and what are you hoping to change as a result of the company being in existence?
Okay, well, just prior to starting HealthPlan Data Solutions and meeting my partners, I had an independent drugstore that I ran on the west side of Columbus, and it was around the time when Medicare Part D started. And Medicare Part D brought a whole new population into insurance coverage for prescriptions. And they were high risk, high utilizers. And so I spent an awful lot of time doing medication therapy management. And as an adjunct with Ohio State and working with students, did a small study, a couple hundred patients, and we tried to measure the impact of a pharmacist intervening with a patient, a senior, and we saw decreased utilization, decreased cost, emergency room avoidance, just saw an awful lot of benefit. And we then sold that drugstore to a chain in across the street, actually, where we usually got most of our business. But we sold that drugstore, and I wanted to take what I had learned in that experience to population health, because it's very hard to meet with individual patients, as time intensive as it is. And I wanted to find a way that I could use software to identify the highest risk patients for companies that had large populations. And so I met my partners, Dee Sarbach and Hal Wright, initially, and we started brainstorming. They were doing some work with a kind of a wellness clinic at the time, and part of their services were looking at the drug spend by a nurse. And they had about probably 10 to 20 drugs they looked at for opportunities. When we talked, and I talked about what I had, which was about 400 or 500 drugs and drug formulations and different colors and flavors of many treating the same disease, so we formed this company and started kind of brainstorming how we would take this idea of therapeutic interchange and monitoring drug use to the market. And then we brought in Michael Blevins. Michael Blevins and I had known each other actually through church, and Michael is has been an IT consultant for many years here in Columbus. I won't even say how many years, but quite a few. He's worked with literally all the largest companies, the university, Ohio State University, Battelle, Wendy's, The Limited, and has built many relational databases and the programming around that to make that all work together. And so that's ideal for our application because there's a lot of different data sets that you have to relate and create usable data.
And how did you get access to those data sets?
That's a challenge. One, some of the data sets can cost you a lot of money. So some of them you have to pay for through a service like maybe Metaspan. We had to convince the PBM that serviced our first customer to share the prescription data with us, the complete file. They're very proprietary about their data. The reality is, though, a self-funded, self-insured company owns that data. Yeah. And so we proved that point and started getting the data. And one of the first kind of holy cow moments was looking at that data and realizing that there was very little consistency in the pricing. And so initially, we thought most of our findings would be clinical. The errors made in the actual adjudication of the claims was huge. And so it was a eureka moment because we realized that the savings that we could identify in the PBM performance on meeting the contract terms could pay for any wellness innovations that they wanted to start. So
you'd mentioned earlier that it was about 2 years between the time that you actually founded the company and your first customer engagement.
Right.
What were you doing in those 2 years?
Well, I had a neighbor that had a company that agreed to share data with us so we could start learning from the data. We started writing the programming. Myself and another pharmacist, Jared Grossman, who had been one of my students during that time with Medicare Part D, we started building out and refining our therapeutic interchange model and applying cost points with all those drugs and all those formulations, and just building the structure of what we thought would be needed to actually get paid for the service.
And what inputs did you have from self-insured companies and the PBMs leading up to that, so you made sure that you were building something that they would actually pay you for?
I can't say. The one thing we knew for sure that we could tell them was that we had a very sophisticated therapeutic interchange table, that we could identify patients that could be on less expensive or less medications, period. The insight into the problem with pricing, they didn't have insight into it. I knew it from running a chain and running an independent drugstore that my payments were inconsistent with my cost. The timing of price changes were inconsistent with the market. So I knew that, but it wasn't an intuitive thing where I said, aha, that's where we need to go. It was the first time we actually looked at the data and saw the inconsistencies. And quite frankly, I'd see what the company was paying and what I remembered paying just a few months ago at the drugstore, and I'd say, like, they're worlds apart. You as the payer are paying $3 a pill and I'm buying it for a nickel. Something's wrong. And so we then started the discovery process of what exactly was wrong.
And so those 8 years of the customer engagement, sales, what else have you learned, and how else have you modified and morphed the business to adapt to changes in both regulatory as well as economic climate?
I think one of the biggest things we learned was that if you're going to develop a disruptive, new business model, you don't really know what the market is going to buy. You said about proving value, but you still have to remain flexible and figure out ways that you can be procured. Somebody's got to buy the stuff. And so we went into a market where there was a lot of ignorance, there was a lot of apathy, and then there was pre-existing relationships. So you had the payer, the person that paid for the prescriptions. You had the broker or the consultant that helped them get the PBM. The PBM was a relationship. And then you might have a third-party payer that kind of oversaw medical and pharmacy. But these were established relationships, and we had to figure out a way to go in there in a period of discovery and show them that there was opportunities and try and figure out a way for all of us to play together and for us to make money. And sometimes we were very disruptive. We might be taking a company and having them change relationships, and that can be a tough sale.
So where were those hurdles in that, when you look at that group of individuals and organizations that you were communicating with in terms of understanding your value proposition, where were those hurdles and how did you overcome those?
Well, one of the hurdles was knowing who your opponents might be and what their motivation might be to keep you out of the market. So the first, most obvious one is the PBM, the Pharmacy Benefit Manager. We were threatening their margin. And then the broker, unbeknownst to us, was very comfortable in that they place a PBM, they might be getting some kind of revenue through that relationship. Or you have an employee network, a coalition that buys benefits, provides it for employers. They also sometimes are getting paid in the back door, basically, by the participants, the PBMs and the insurance companies that they work with. And so first of all, knowing what their motivations were was very important, to use that to craft our sales to the clients. And then trying to find a way to make it, in terms of our pricing, hard to say no, improving our return on investment. The first client that we got that was a state agency was the Bureau of Workers' Comp in Ohio. And I started calling on them in 2012. And in 2014, I finally got them to agree to just share 1 quarter's worth of data with us. And finally gave it to us. It was de-identified. And we looked at it and we identified millions of dollars of waste. And so, having done this for nothing, we gave them 5 drugs, and it saved them $1.2 million just on those 5 drugs. And just said, basically, there's a lot more. Do you think it's worth hiring us? And they decided it was. But the whole process, getting on state term schedule, breaking down that barrier where they thought they understood their spend, took over 2 years.
Is that? Oh.
We have a question.
Oh.
Please
Yep.
repeat it. Hugh Caffey asks, what is their sales model? Direct, sale, do you have a sales force, digital marketing? How do you sell?
Okay, so the question from Hugh is, how do you sell? What's your sales model, internal, external, and structure for your sales?
So that's evolved over time. Hugh, it's good to see you're in the audience there. Wish I could see you. But initially, it was basically Dee Sarbach and myself who did the sales. But we started adding channel partners over time. There were some fee-only financial, some brokerage houses that used our services to help their clients. And although we directly contract with the payer. Since that time, we've started conversations and have engaged with some large medical payment integrity companies. Not sure I can name them right now, but they're big. And they already have inroads into the marketplace. They're selling services that might be considered similar, but they don't have a pharmacy piece. And to build it, I can tell them, and I think they realize, takes years. It takes a lot of specialized knowledge. It's just it's cheaper to hire us and use us. And so we would sell in partnership with them and share the revenue with those large companies. But we still get accounts through recommendations from happy clients at this point too. So
to flex off of that for just a second, when you became a pharmacist, did you think you would ever be involved in sales?
Not like this. I mean, I think that being in retail pharmacy, I always felt I was in some level of sales. I spent a lot of time studying sales. Zig Ziglar was one of my favorite guys, my go-to guys. But it was selling ideas to patients. There's a lot of resistance in patients coming to the counter of a pharmacy. Either the drug's too expensive, they don't want to do what their doctor wants them to do. Maybe it's a wife trying to convince a husband that he does actually need to have a test and a medication for a condition. And I'm part of that team to sell him. Yeah. So I did have training.
Yeah. No, it's a good point. We have another one.
We have another question. Andrew Kingery asks, how do you see the role of AI and data analytics changing the business model for the foreseeable future?
So Andrew would like to know how you see AI, data analytics, changing your business model now and in the future.
I think what it's going to do is make us more efficient. And so we have huge amounts of data that our system currently can digest over 1 million prescription claims in less than 30 minutes and tell you just about everything you need to know about it. So Michael Blevins has done a wonderful job at engineering our system, but there still is lots of information we have to look at manually, like contracts. I might get a contract from a federal or state agency, and it might be 200 pages of the contract with the pharmacy benefit manager. And then we have to digest their plan design. And so AI and its ability to break down documents like that can make us much more efficient, because we take all that information and load it into our software. And that, along with the prescription data and the pricing tables we have and the clinical information tables that we've developed, all work together. And this is a catch point, a point that just slows us down. And so what that's going to enable us to do is to take on more clients quicker. I don't know that it'll change particularly what we do. Probably some of the clinical decisions with machine learning that our pharmacists make will teach the machine to make some of those decisions.
And do those decisions affect different customers differently? So self-insured versus plan-based customers.
when we talk about self-insured, we're talking about a model where pharmacy is carved out and it's separate from their Anthem medical mutual contract. The fully insured, where pharmacy is part of that, we currently don't work with them.
Okay.
We're in discussions with like Anthem to provide our services to them because they are working with the PBM. But with the the integration that's happened with the pharmacy benefit managers and the insurance companies, it's all kind of a business move on their part to bring it all inside, because the less that you can actually see the workings inside these large insurance companies, the more room they have for margin. And so we're a threat to that model, and we'll continue to work against that model. We currently have a new client we just signed up that had one of the large insurance companies that has one of their own PBMs, and based on the information that we showed them, we're able to get them to carve it out. And guess what? They didn't raise their premiums a whole bunch. So the large insurance company still wanted to maintain that account. They did lose some revenue through the pharmacy, we know, but they maintained the premium in order to secure the account.
Another question. How are they continuing to scale this across the nation, or what is the current market penetration? It seems like such a win and keeps our healthcare costs down.
So the question is, what's your plan, and how are you able to scale this?
Okay.
So being able to take the contracts with workers' comp and other agencies, for example, and replicate that, but also self-insured, those folks all talk to one another.
Right.
So how are you replicating that across the country? Because it seems like there's a clear benefit here.
Yeah, the states have their own network. And they see what we did. In 2018, we audited Ohio Medicaid, and for the first time demonstrated spread pricing with the PBMs. And so there was a lot of chatter, a lot of news articles, over 100 articles in the Dispatch alone on this issue with pharmacy benefit managers, but in a lot of other trade journals. That was a door opener for our own sales force, for myself, for Dee, and for some of our channel partners. These large companies we're working with that are in either large consulting, IT, or medical payment integrity, they already have contracts with some of these states, and they also have flexibility in adding services. And so it makes the procurement process for us much simpler. We don't have to go out to an RFP and go through that process, or I guess the first step is convince them they need an RFP for our services, and then actually compete on the very thing that we've sold them on. And then there's many large firms out there that would say they do what we do, but they don't. And so, but that is an opportunity to team up with these companies and kind of avoid that long procurement process with state and federal agencies.
How often are some of those companies potential co-marketing or sales channel partners as opposed to being direct competitors?
I would say that now it's probably 75% channel partners, 25% internal sales. We have not invested a big part of our personnel budget in salespeople. We'd rather use other companies who have pre-existing relationships. And so that first barrier that I talked about of ignorance, apathy, and pre-existing relationships, that's an end around that.
Yeah.
So it really helps.
So switching gears a little bit, and we'll come back to the, you waited quite a while before you raised capital.
We did.
How come?
Well, there's the selfish reason, and then there's the altruistic.
All of those are good.
Yeah, it's all good. So the selfish one is we wanted to hang on to our company and have control of the direction. It wasn't, I mean, it is certainly partly financial, but probably control is a bigger issue. And we have, some idea, a vision of where we want this company to go. It'll be much more than just the pharmacy arena in the future. It'll serve much more than the payer in the future. And so we wanted to ensure that that happened. And then sometimes people that want to bring money, you're not sure of their allegiances and alliances. And we wanted to be sure that we didn't get taken over by a venture capitalist group or something that maybe had alliances with the PBM industry or with the insurance industry that would change our business model. And then also we wanted to be sure, in the beginning we got money from family and friends. You don't want to waste their money.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. No, that's
yeah.
we almost generally advise against that
Right.
for that very reason.
Right.
Yeah. No, that's and so you kind of got to that, into the whole notion of using other people's money, but part of that is having a compelling story to
Right.
tell investors. And so how did your story evolve to the point where you felt comfortable with the business and going out and raising money?
Well, as we raised money, I always felt confident that in proportion to the amount that we raised, I could get a return on it. And Dee felt the same way. And so we just kind of incrementally stepped up the investment. And then we always looked at our revenue stream and our perceived value in the marketplace, and used that to determine how much more we were going to raise. We're very grateful to have Rev 1 having invested in us, and along with our first institutional investor. And that was a big step for us. It was a big step for you too. And so I think that we had enough experience. It might seem that it was late. I mean, you're probably talking from our first customer to your investment in the institutional. That was in late 18, the decision was made. So, it took almost 8 years. But we felt very grounded and secure in our product.
Yeah.
And had continued to develop it and broaden the application, where I could look you in the eye and say it's a good investment. So, going forward, that's how we'll continue to do it.
Yeah. Good. Yeah, but
We do have another question. So, in your opinion, have PBMs become more collaborative in the sense that they're willing to share data? If so, what made that mindset shift happen?
So the question is, are PBMs becoming more collaborative? And if so, how did that happen?
Yeah, not willingly, but it has happened. I think as you get more transparency in any industry, they have to compete by being more transparent. If they're not, they're going to go by the wayside. In the industry, there's 4 PBMs that control over 80% of the market. That can be a challenge, but I can tell you that one of the biggest in the country works very well with us and several of our clients, and we provide a payment integrity solution. So that means that our software is literally in the middle of the payment cycle. So the patient gets the prescription at the drugstore, it's adjudicated by the PBM, and then usually in a 2-week period, it's billed to the payer. We're in the middle of that, and we have the ability to take millions of claims, analyze them, and within 2 days, which is usually 3 days before they are due to pay it, we can tell them all the claims that have problems, and if there are any that should be withheld, they can withhold it. So it's changed the leverage. That's the bottom line.
And so is HES viewed in this situation then as a necessary or a good independent arbiter of that, versus if a PBM said, "Oh, we do this ourselves, it's built into our system, so it's not independent as it is now"?
They always say they do what we do, but I think it's I don't want to, I mean, this sounds terrible, but PBMs are like children. And most businesses are. They pay attention to what you pay attention to.
Yeah.
And that's how my kids always were, great kids.
Yep.
But if you didn't keep an eye on certain things that were important, they wouldn't do it. And so what motivation does a PBM have to make sure all their pricing and contract adherence and plan design are adhered to when they don't hear anything from the customer? And so that's one of the paradigms that is switched. We've elevated the game for the payer so that they can have meaningful conversations with the PBM, and in doing that, challenging them, improve their game. Mm-hmm. And we are seeing the cost curve bend. Mm-hmm. So not only the PBMs that we're working with are not only meeting their contract terms and the plan design and the regulations and the market competitiveness, they're overperforming. And they're doing that because we're in the midst. Mm-hmm. You know, another thing too, if PBMs are often audited by large agencies, and that's after the planned year, so you go a whole year. And then after, say, 6 months, they allow you to do an audit. Then it takes another year to settle the audit. And here the payer, how would they know whether it's right or wrong? They hire an accounting firm to look at sample set of data, and then they argue with the PBM. They're running a business. They don't have time to argue with the PBM, particularly this division of the PBM, which is the audit division, which is lawyers and people that are paid to delay. And we do audits, and I can tell you it's not a way to make money. The only reason that we do it is to learn, to benefit our customers, but we want to put in payment integrity. Because what changes is when you have payment integrity and you're challenging them throughout the plan year, instead of arguing with the lawyers, you're talking to the account manager who he or she wants to make the client happy. Mm-hmm. And so we resolve situations before they become a big issue. We had clients that we audited that we found $3.2 million and they settled for just under $400,000. Now, as a business, if you're getting a percentage of the findings, that really is painful. So it's not a good business model for us either. But think of all the time that's wasted. The PBM wastes time, the client wastes time, and we waste time doing these audits. Mm-hmm. Why not just make sure with technology that they're right now?
Yeah, the first time.
Yeah.
Yep. Another question?
We had an email question come in that said, did the publicity of your work with the state of Ohio positively or negatively impact your business?
Oh, so yeah, the question is, did the publicity of doing business with the state of Ohio, was that positive or negative?
Both. Initially, it cost us more money than we got paid. We took that contract with Medicaid knowing we'd lose money on it just to avoid the procurement cycle, just because we wanted to prove our value in that arena. We ended up having to hire a lawyer to protect us because the PBMs came after us thinking that we had released information, which we hadn't. So, you know, whether it's perceived, real or not, you still have to hire a lawyer. But we got a ton of value in the other states seeing what we had done and interest and publicity. So it's been worth it. But it was at times painful.
You know, this next one's a little bit of a sensitive topic in the sense that, you know, you always don't want to be seen as being opportunistic, but as an entrepreneur, you have to be opportunistic. Mm-hmm. So we're in the middle of this COVID-19 pandemic, and now with a market downturn. Do you see HES's fundamental business as being advantaged, disadvantaged, or neutral affected by COVID-19?
More neutral than anything. I don't currently see an advantage other than as a company we can provide good information to our customers on how to handle the crisis. But CDC and the World Health Organization, everybody's providing a lot of information. but we're pretty neutral because if there's any negative to us, it's states are focused on other things. The federal government is focused on other things. And so we have contracts in the pipeline that are going to be delayed. We haven't heard that, but we have to assume that. And so we've just gone through a round internally of tightening our belt, just so, again, we're not spending money, that's other people's money, without additional revenue.
Yep.
So we'd rather be just neutral at worst at this point, and then hopefully grow once this blows by.
And so what's next on your horizon? You said there's going to be more to the business than working with PBMs and companies and plans. So what's next that you're free to talk about?
We're going to look real closely at medical drug spend. So on the medical side, there's a lot of medications that are paid for through the medical plan. They might be things you get in the hospital or upon discharge or in a clinic because you have cancer. Maybe you're getting a specialty medication that has to be infused. And so rather than going to your drugstore, you're having it administered at a clinic. And the health plan's being billed for that. And ultimately, the payer is being billed for that. Nobody's looking at that real closely. So we are going to be looking at that. And there's duplicate billings. Sometimes a patient will go to the pharmacy, get a drug to be administered, take it to the clinic, and they get billed both by the pharmacy and the clinic. A lot of room for error in quantities. You know, what's 1 unit? Is it 1/10 of a mil, 1 mil, 1 bottle, 1 vial? So there's a lot of mistakes that are made that can cost, instead of hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars. And so we think this is a real opportunity for us to help the payers.
So can you make a case why the payers should be interested in partnering with you and being integrated and with what HES is doing, as opposed to viewing you as necessarily as an annoyance?
Well, the one thing we work very hard at doing is we don't want to add to your workload. We actually want to take work off of your hands. And so that's number one. I think they'll see a return in terms of the time spent on the prescription benefit plan. 2, you'll have certainty. You'll have awareness. Uncertainty stinks. Nobody wants to be uncertain. That's the worst thing about COVID-19, right? I mean, COVID-19, everybody's just kind of wondering, everybody I ask, has nobody in their circle that has it currently. We all have rumors we've heard. But I'm just real curious how it's affecting people. But even though they don't know somebody, it's affecting their lifestyle. Can't go out to eat, can't do a lot of things. So humans don't like uncertainty, so we can bring certainty to the prescription drug plan. We can assure you that it's market competitive. The last thing you want to be is a workers' comp provider and have the PBM and the broker tell you, well, you're just right in line with the market. If you're right in line with the market, you're losing. And we can show you how to bend that curve, so that's worth looking at. And then you'll like us.
Exactly. Any other questions?
What would be an example of a problem order? Is it a problem with the prescription or the provider?
So the question is, what an example of a problem order? The prescription, the provider, what other factors create a problem order?
Okay. So when a prescription is purchased and it's adjudicated, it could be a provider, a prescriber problem where the prescriber wrote for a quantity or a drug that could be dangerous for the patient. Our system would catch that. It might be the provider wrote for a drug where there's alternatives and wrote this DAW on it, dispense as written, and they won't let you substitute. So you're getting a brand name drug at a high cost versus a equivalent generic. that's something we would bring up to the attention of the payer and to the potentially to the provider. With the opioid concerns, our system can identify dangerous trends there. There might be fraud out in the market. The provider network also includes the pharmacies, and so there are times when there's a physician and a pharmacy that are working together, providing maybe something like a compound. We had one incident on the West Coast where one family of 5 people all got the same compound from the same doctor, same pharmacy, and it was $2,000 a month. Now, everybody can't have the same itch at the same time like that. I mean, not for 2,000. And so it was out and out fraud. And the payer that we did this for, actually their compound utilization went from about $2 million a year to over $25 million a year in a short period of time. And there was maybe about less than a dozen doctors, less than 6 pharmacies, and all in one regional area. So
do you integrate with companies like CoverMyMeds that provide prior authorization and clearance for pharmaceuticals?
We would love to work with CoverMyMeds. We aren't currently working with CoverMyMeds. We've met. Actually, one of their founders is on our board. Okay. So we're very interested in investigating how possibly we could work together. Yeah.
Any other questions?
I have a question, actually. You spoke about the opioid epidemic.
Yes.
Can you dive more into how your product may be mitigating some of those problems?
Okay.
So Heather asked about the opioid epidemic and how HCS product and services could help mitigate those issues.
Okay. So because of the placement of our software, we can't stop a claim. So it's already happened. But we can look at, number one, if it's a new medication for a patient. So we say they're opiate naive, so they've never had it before. And a doctor's writing for 100 tablets and they're a dentist, that's an issue. Mm-hmm. And the reason may not be the patient. The reason may be the family members who are going to access that medication through the medicine cabinet. We also monitor the morphine equivalent dose. So we're looking at how high of a dose is being prescribed and consumed by the patient, and whether it is rational, makes sense, whether it's escalating. Does the drug match the diagnosis with the patient? So we can run our software and create a list of patients that are on high doses for long periods of time that are still escalating. So those would be targets for care managers to do an outreach and hopefully get them the right treatment. We don't do the outreach, okay? So we identify them. There also might be cases of fraud there where there are family members who intercept prescriptions for family members that don't even realize they're coming. They thought they were done with the opioid, but they continue to come because the family member has called the doctor for refills. So it does happen.
So what general advice would you give other entrepreneurs or would-be entrepreneurs, given the path that you've taken and where you are today from where you started?
Well, I would say find partners you can trust, number one. Test your theory. Find people that would participate with you and give you an opportunity to test it at small or no cost, and prove yourself. You have to be open-minded and realize that your best ideas 10 years ago seem silly today. And so you grow in sophistication and you have to be open to that. You have to listen to your customer and their needs. What are they willing to pay for? If they're not willing to pay for it, ask them why. And try to understand what's going on in these relationships. Is it apathy? And I tell you, if you go to a state or federal bureaucracy, there's a lot of apathy and they don't want to change anything. And so you learn, go to the right people, and you have to often press things down in that atmosphere. And then always serve the needs of your customer. If you got to change to be better, you got to change. I guess that's it.
Okay, great.
Lifestyle's not number one, I can tell you that. You should see my car.
Yeah. We have lots of those examples. Any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you very much. This has been wonderful. Thanks for being our guinea pig.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I think this bodes well for the future.
I would shake hands with you.
I know,
but,
right. Well, thanks again.
Thank you.